Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Hi there. If I haven't met you, I'm Alex. I am the Minister to Families here at St. Thomas. We're actually going to talk about what my role is a little further on, and we're going to kind of talk about all the roles of the church today, because as we come to church, there's just a lot happening, and there's a lot of logistics that go on kind of behind the scenes to make services happen and in our community happen that we're going to dive into and take a deeper look at how the wheels get what's the word terminology here? I'm just thinking of
Grease.
Yes, thank you. That's the word. It's too early in the morning for me, and my daughter didn't have a good night of sleep last night, so I didn't either. So we're gonna jump in, and first of all, and second of all, I'm glad to be here with you guys. I love confirmation. I've taught confirmation a lot. Usually in years past, I've taught it to junior hires. And I must say, I much more enjoy teaching confirmation to adults. It's a lot more engaging, a lot more like, oh, you guys actually want to be here, rather than an 8th grader who's like, I got up because mom made me. You're like, I get it, kid. I get it. So I'm really excited to be doing this with you guys. It's really fun. So we're going to talk about the roles and our leadership of the Episcopal Church, the Episcopal world. As I thought about how to talk about it, I kind of decided that it would be best to kind of break it into 3 groups, because there's so many different parts to the church in general, but also our church itself has so many moving parts. It's easy to get bogged down in one or some things. So we're gonna take it in 3 parts. We're gonna talk about the leadership of the service. That would be what you go into at the 8 o'clock or the 10:30 service. We're gonna talk about the leadership roles that are involved in making the service happen. We're going to talk about the leadership roles that happen outside the service that make the actual building happen, the things that I think we're good. I don't think we have any kids today. That was Alexandria. She was just checking in to see if we have the kiddos too, but I think we're okay. We're going to talk about outside the service, logistical things that happen, like what keeps the lights on in the buildings and how we choose our rectors and and all that kind of stuff. So we'll go into logistics of that. And then we'll also talk about the kind of hierarchy of the outside of our church and our kind of governing diocese is what we call it. We'll talk a little bit about that, because some people don't even know that we have this overarching government above us that really owns our property and kind of has say over a lot of what we do. So we'll talk about the diocese as well, and kind of their role and our role with them and our leadership roles within that. So we'll start with, and we won't get too bogged down in the diocese conversation, because I want us to focus more on our church and what you're going to see here every single day, or when you come to church on Sunday mornings. So we'll start with the service part. This is also a really good time to ask any questions you have about the roles, especially Mike as well, just like asking, I've always wondered, what is that? Go ahead and ask it, because this is the time we want to talk about those things. So I'll just start by saying that we have the, also, this is just you don't have to get this. This is my fun little book that I like. It's called the Episcopal Handbook. It's not really up to date yet anymore, but it has a lot of fun answers and a lot of fun ways for questions that I've had sometimes. So if you ever just want a fun read, this is a good one, and you want to learn more about Episcopal Church, it's good. So we'll start with, again, the services. We'll start with the first and foremost, the person you see the most in a church service is the priest. You will see the head guy, who is our head guy or woman. Ours is Mike. The service doesn't start without the priest. The party doesn't begin without the priest saying, all right, let's do this. And the priest is really kind of the guy or woman who does a lot of this, making the service happen and making it move. There are a lot of moving parts within the service that help the priest make it go, but the priest kind of is dictating the pace and the way in which the service is going to be held. That's why you would come into our service and you would find similarities and a likeness to maybe another Episcopal church down the road, St. Chris, but it wouldn't be the same experience. The priest dictates what the experience you're having is like. They dictate what the words are going to be used. They dictate what's the music, where's the music going to be, what prayer is going to be said when. And they make all that happen on Sunday morning. So that's why in our Episcopal world, you would find a similar service and you go, this is very similar, but you would go, it's not the same. So the priest is also has a lot of responsibility within that role. So they make sure the service starts, they make sure everyone's there, ready to go. They follow the program or the Book of Common Prayer to lead and guide. They also are the sermon givers, and they are the gospel, not the gospel readers, and they also the communion givers, the givers of bread and wine. The priest, a priest is the only one who can give communion and wine because they are an ordained minister, which means they went to a very fancy school and they got taught very accurately how to do this. And so someone like me, who is a lay minister, we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. A lay minister, I can help distribute the bread and wine that Father Mike would bless, but I cannot go up there and say, okay, I'm doing communion now, let me bless this stuff. Not how it works, it's not in the rule book. So the priest is responsible for doing that. Then of course the priest is responsible for giving the blessing at the end and ending the service. So the priest is a very important role to church on the service on Sunday mornings. However, we are going to discuss that you don't actually really need them for a church service on Sunday mornings. You can do a church service on Sunday mornings without the priest. You couldn't just do communion without him, which actually I think we're going to experience here in about a month. We're going to experience that ourselves because Father Mike's going to be out and away. I'm going to be giving the sermon. And since I can't do communion, I think we're just going to do an abbreviated service, which is appropriate because at that time, the leadership of the church has switched over to me running the service. But since I'm not a priest, we'll have to adjust it. So that's within our own service, you'll see a different slight change. It'll still be great and wonderful, although Mike is much smarter than I am. So the sermon will be less
long.
That's true. So yes,
we have a few Reverend Emeritus, like Jim.
McGill.
Oh yes, definitely.
And a couple more. Why could they not be called?
They can. Sometimes it's just a matter of scheduling. That's a really good point to bring up. Thank you for that. We do have what we call supply priest, or I guess I don't know if the term's priest in waiting, or just priests who have kind of retired and picked a church home that people like Father Mike can use to help us with our services. And there are supply priests out there that the diocese does supply to us, that when our rectors has to be away, we can actually have a priest come in and be a substitute teacher. Basically, they come in, they take a look at the service, they kind of talk to the priest ahead of time, and they can be the fill-in priest. Sometimes it's down to scheduling that, like, they can't just find a supply priest, and that's okay because church can still happen without a priest. As Father Mike has told me this past week and many times before, basically we as members of the church can almost do anything that is put before us that Father Mike does. We just kind of have to do an altered version of some of the things, but basically we can do all those things. Yes.
Another answer, Joe, is that we have to pay supply clergy.
Yes.
And I don't have to pay Alex anymore to do a service.
Yes.
So you'll still
right there.
You'll still get Eucharist when I'm here. It is just going to come from something I've already consecrated.
Yes.
So it'll come out from the tabernacle, and you'll get it. Okay. And Alex will be really clear. This has already been consecrated. It's just as good as when it was consecrated, and I'm going to distribute that to you now.
Yep. And so, yeah, the logistics of putting a service together, things that, you probably don't think about as you're sitting there on Sunday morning going, oh, where's the mic? It's kind of the way that all works. So that's kind of the priest role of the service. It's a very important role of the church service. Not to be said that there aren't the other important roles within the church service. Sitting in the service, you might also see, especially in our service, you might see someone who's wearing a black and kind of red. That's what we call a verger. Now, a verger is actually a special thing here at St. Thomas. If you go to many other Episcopal churches, you won't see a verger. Before I got here at St. Thomas, I had not actually known what a verger was. I had never seen one before. So vergers are kind of, I struggle with the way of describing them. They're not servants per se, but they're there basically to serve the service. They're there to be the number two behind the priest and what would be an assisting priest, and be that kind of leader and head of all the lay ministers that are part of the service. They kind of help guide those within the service and make sure it runs, so that the priest can focus on doing all the main parts of the service and the verger can take care of the others. So that's who you'll see in our church service leading the way with their staff. called the Verge, right? And they will be there helping out Father Mike or whoever the priest is to do all the different things. You may also see sometimes, we don't have them right now, we've had them before, but I've also seen this. It's called a LEM, L-E-M. That is a lay Eucharistic minister. Eucharistic ministers are purposely there to help for communion, to help with Eucharist, to help make sure that Eucharist is given to everyone, basically to be another hand, to either give out the wine or the bread so that communion can go faster. Actually, I think we have a couple people coming up who are lambs. You'll see in the service will come up right before the communion is given out, and they'll come up and help Mike hand out the bread and the wine. And so that's why they're called lay Eucharist ministers, because lay. Basically, if you're a lay minister, you're not an ordained priest. That's what that terminology is. So when you're lay, you're not a priest. So a lay Eucharistic, during the Eucharist minister, you're helping minister the thing. So yes.
Who can give the gospel, read it, and the sermon?
The gospel reading, I think, is just the priest. No.
Typically, it's a deacon. So there's 3 orders of ministry in the Episcopal Church that have ordination behind them: the deacon, the priest, and the bishop.
Right.
We're the only tradition where if you're a bishop, you've been ordained 3 times. First ordained a deacon, then ordained a priest, then ordained a bishop. So I've been ordained twice, a deacon and a priest. Some people stop at the ordination of the diaconate, and they are meant to represent the church to the world and the world to the church. Usually what they do is remind us, hey, there's people incarcerated, don't forget them. You owe these people kindness and hospitality. In the service, you'll see a deacon wearing a stole, it's like a sash, like a beauty pageant winner. And they typically are the ones who read the gospel. Now in our convocation, which goes from St. Andrews and Pearland down to Galveston Island, there are no vocational deacons, none. And I would tell you, if we had a deacon anyway, whoever's preaching reads the gospel, because that just makes sense to me. I don't want someone else reading the gospel if I'm preaching, because it affects the way I read the gospel to you, right? What I'm going to say about it. That's my formation. It's non-traditional in the Episcopal Church. Usually you always have a deacon who reads in the middle of the people. So in this church, because I'm the rector, which means I'm always right. Rector, it does, right? Unless the bishop's here, the right reverend is the bishop who's always right. In his absence, I'm always right. I say, whoever's preaching reads the gospel. Who can preach? Anybody who is ordained and resident in this diocese, or someone who's been licensed. That could be a lay person or a clergy person, like Craig Morgan is a retired clergy person from the Diocese of West Tennessee, but he's licensed to preach in the diocese. If he were to go about preaching, even as a priest, without the bishop's permission, it would be a violation of how we do things. The bishop is in charge of every parish in the diocese. I'm the absentee landlord for the bishop. So I have to make sure the bishop is giving consent to whoever preaches, and that means licensure, even if you're a priest from a different diocese. You can get licensed as a lay person to preach. Nick Rowe, one of our members, went to Iona Seminary in Camp Allen. They meet once a year. They're for people lay or people who are interested in becoming clergy. They meet once a month, and it's sort of meant to be a diocesan equivalent to getting an MDiv, which is the 3-year degree I got. And then at rector's discretion, other people can preach. So Alex is not officially licensed, but it's up to me. And I've decided he can do this on October the 9th and 22nd. So that's how it goes.
It's a dean.
What did you call the area from Pearland to Galveston?
They call it the convocation. So our diocese is so big geographically that it's been subdivided into 10 convocations. Each convocation has a dean. I'm the dean of the Galveston convocation, which means I send diocesan emails to all of the people on the communication hub, and I'm supposed to uphold my clergy siblings interpersonally as well. It has no remuneration. The bishop asks you and you agree to do it a year at a time, and it gets codified at council. So that's it. That's the
I've
deal.
never heard that before.
In San Diego, we didn't have convocations or deaneries because there were only 46 parishes in the diocese. Well, we've got 150 plus, and we've got 5 bishops. And the bishops have to make a visit at least every 5 years, but they try annually, which means they've got a master calendar, because that's a lot of places to go between Dallas and Tyler and Austin down to Galveston and over to Beaumont, right? I mean, the Diocese of Texas is very big, so hence we've subdivided, but you won't find that in San Diego. You will find it in Los Angeles, another really big diocese, which stretches all the way up north of Ventura and all the way out past Pasadena and, you know, getting up close to Bakersfield. So it just depends on how large and frankly, how much money the diocese has, typically whether they need to subdivide into convocations or deaneries.
What is the approximate geographic boundary of the diocese? Is it the whole state or?
Originally, it was the whole state of Texas. In fact, it was the whole Republic of Texas. And then there's been some split-aways. The Diocese of Dallas split off from the Diocese of Texas, which is the first one. So did West Texas. So did, I think there's like an East
There's an east
Texas.
one. Yeah, there's one more.
And there might be
Well, is San Antonio,
it's in West
West
Texas.
Texas.
that's all of West Texas?
Yeah, it's all West Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we used to be with.
And so they split off from us with our permission and consent. And the Diocese of Fort Worth just came back. They had split off,
Yeah.
but they came back into the diocesan fold. And they have a new dean now too. So there's a dean over those like 7 churches that are up there.
You mentioned the previous consecrated Eucharist. And
Yeah, we call that the
One.
reserve. Yeah.
that'll be the difference in the liturgy and body. The second
Yeah,
part.
the liturgy of the sacrament is what we call it. The service is split into the liturgy of the word.
So I'd be interested now in talking about liturgy of the word on that day.
Yeah, the liturgy of the word is the liturgy of the word. There'll be 4 readings, just like there always are. The sermon is meant to elucidate those readings. So the readings are the Bible broken open. The sermon is put back together. And then that mirrors the liturgy of the sacrament, breaking of the bread, bringing us all together, if that makes sense.
Yes, Bill.
You said something about an MDiv. Is that a Master of Divinity?
It is. Now, we don't have to have an MDiv, although it's preferred because it's a professional degree. So in addition to the 80 hours of graduate coursework, I had to do practicums. Once at an NA treatment for homeless Black crack addicts in Atlanta. The second was at a church. And then we typically, to be ordained in the Episcopal Church, do something called a CPE, a clinical pastoral education, which often happens at a hospital. So I was an on-call chaplain, like slept in the hospital in case there was a coding or a death. I was called on the danger phone and went straight there. Most dioceses require that of us to have a CPE under our belt. But the MDiv is, you can get an MA, a Master of Arts in religion or theology, and you can still get ordained depending on the bishop's rules and the diocese you're in. Often, if you've done that route, they may say, well, we want you to do an internship, or, hey, we want you to spend what's called an Anglican year at a Episcopal seminary. I went to a Methodist seminary. And so often they ask you to do an Anglican year, Anglican finishing school, somewhere like Virginia Theological Seminary, or here, a seminary in the Southwest. In my case, I didn't need any education. That's not what I need. And the Bishop of San Diego, thank God, did not require me to do it because it would have cost me $30,000. And for what?
How much difference is there in going to a seminary that's Methodist versus Episcopalian versus some other cemetery?
They are sometimes cemeteries. The thing, the only.
I stumbled on that, I'm sorry.
No, the only real difference would be like what your chapel service is like. And so since I went to this Methodist school, the chapel service went more by what the United Methodist order of worship would look like than, say, the Episcopal rite. Although we did some variants. Episcopal seminaries tend to be very small. The seminary I went to had 700 students. Contrast that with seminary of the Southwest, which has like 70, not even that many, 50, something like that. I mean, they're very small. The quality of instruction should be similar. I mean, when we talk about studying scripture, we all share that scholastically. If I went to an Anglican school, or an Episcopal seminary, I probably would have taken like a different kind of church history class as my elective or as my requirement. Like I might have had to do extra courses on Anglican history or Anglican specific liturgy. I didn't do that. I didn't take the Methodist ones either, because those were electives where I went, and I didn't want to be a Methodist minister, so I didn't take any of those.
Lastly, you have outside the church and outside the diocese, not necessarily Episcopalian. But we'll ask you about St. Luke's, because I was wondering. Specific charges to hospitals, specific charges to jails
Mhm.
and the like.
That's with bishop's approval. So there are priests who don't serve in churches. One good example is the diocese has a staff of people who are missioners for X, Y, or Z, congregational vitality or whatever. Often they're clergy, they serve full time. The bishop recognizes their service as church service, which allows their pension to apply to them later. If I'm serving outside of a church and the bishop does not count that as service toward my pension, then it doesn't serve my pension. That's important to me for retirement. So you might find those people chaplains at Episcopal schools. They're clergy. They don't have parish charges, but the bishop has recognized that as service. So it really is up to the bishop's discretion in whatever diocese. There could be, as you mentioned, a hospital chaplain. When we owned St. Luke's Hospital, the diocese owned that. The chaplains were pretty much all Episcopal priests. Well, we sold that hospital to the Romans, and so most of them now are Roman priests or nuns, although there probably is one or two Episcopal priests on staff still who are chaplains. But all of that is with bishop's consent.
Thank you.
Oh, jumping ahead of me. All
That's
the
good.
things. It's great. No, it's good. Also, if you weren't here for the first confirmation class, you have one of the smartest rectors in all the land, because Mike just split out the history of the church in about 45 minutes and hit everything. And yeah, he doesn't need any more schooling. He's got it. He's got it. We're good.
He's got this.
Right. So really quickly back to leadership roles of the service. Last one I wanted to hit on was acolytes. You will see them in white robes. They're usually younger youth, but they don't have to be. That's a common thing of people are like, what has to be the youth? No, it doesn't. It can be adults. So if you want to be an acolyte as an adult, you are more than welcome. It's an acolyte isn't basically an assistant to all within the service. They are playing the assistant role. Anything that needs to be done, they'll do. Usually they're holding the candles or the cross down the aisle. They will be there for the communion. Mike has used some of the acolytes sometimes to act as the Eucharistic ministers to help give out communion. They also ring the little bells when it's time to ring the little bells. And they're very helpful to have. Acolytes you will see be used in different ways, and this is mostly, again, within any service you go to, it'll be different how acolytes are used. It'll be different how vergers or limbs are used, whether you see them or not. Each service is different towards that. So, but that's kind of the legit. Oh, and of course, sorry, the choir. We can't forget the choir. Or sometimes you may go to a contemporary service and you'll see a band. There is always a kind of, depending on, and there are some services where there is not music. But if you go to service where there is music, you have the choir or the band, which you can also be a part of. Our Sunday morning choir rehearses every Thursday night, and they also rehearse on Sunday morning. And we have a really great choir director. So if you want to sing in choir, that's a great leadership role within the church service as well. I think that's all the service roles. Oh, of course, and you as well. As a member of the congregation, you play a role within the service. That is actually something quite interesting about our Episcopal Church, is that we are, I like to call it active. You are an active member of the service. You are within the church service, not a passive watcher. You are called to be an active participation. Yes.
I don't know if you realize this, but at the end of the Eucharistic prayer, there's this part where everybody says amen. And Nobody says it, nothing changes. And we can only celebrate the Eucharist with 2 or more people.
Yes.
So I can't consecrate the Eucharist by myself. Somebody else has to say, verily, may it be, amen.
Mhm.
Or it does not work.
Yeah.
The real present is dependent. The real presence of the Lord is dependent on there being 2 or more gathered.
Right.
The ringing of the bell reminds me, what is the history or the meaning behind that?
That's a good Mike question.
Once upon a time, the service was completely in Latin and no one spoke Latin.
Uh-huh.
And so people were falling asleep. Ding, wake up. That is frankly the course history.
Well, I never understood why.
We do it, to me, it's important because it's extra sensory and to me, it heightens the gravity of what's happening. Some people hate it because they say we should be paying attention anyway. Well, it's whatever makes sense for you.
Mhm.
We use a gong instead of the Sanctus bells most of the time. The Verger, this is also a history piece, was the bailiff in the early church. Remember, early churches were courtrooms given by the emperor, and the verge is like the nightstick. So if you were sleeping, the verge would knock you upside the head. If you brought your sheep in and they were getting too close to the bishop's chair, you'd beat them back. If people were rowdy, the bailiff would, well, handle them. I mean, that's really it. So they still carry that verge, even though hitting people is forbidden.
You know, though, sometimes I wish I had that verge when Evie starts doing stuff and goes, stop
It's
that."
usually the priest that needs it, like you've gone 18 minutes. Anyway,
I know the gong for me personally, it piques Evie's interest when we're in communion. She's not asleep ever, but she definitely goes, oh, what's that? So it kind of adds an intrigue of like, oh yeah, look, something's going on up there. That's important. Let's watch.
one other role Alex didn't mention because you don't see it is the altar guild.
Ah, yes.
And those are men and women alike who prepare everything so that you can come in and the Lord's table is set and inviting. And so they do this work usually on Fridays and Saturdays. They do things like fill the candles up with oil. This comes from our Jewish heritage that we always have 2 candles on the Lord's table, like our Jewish brothers and sisters have 2 candles every Shabbat. Also from our Jewish tradition, the cup is silver, and they do things like polish it because silver is prone to tarnish. We still use it, not just because our Jewish brothers and sisters do this on Shabbat with a kiddush, that's what they call the chalice, but also because it's antimicrobial. So it turns out that communion is relatively safe medically. There's never been a long-term longitudinal study we've discovered, but the silver cup, the port wine, which is a fortified alcohol, and the purificator all help to ward off infection and bacteria. The altar guild manages all of that because what that purificator is getting off is not just the wine, but the friction is helping activate the silver and it's getting off a lipstick, which would be a vector, right? And then everything's linen. So the altar guild cleans that and they fold it and they press it and it's beautiful. And those are the people who change the hangings. Those are the folks who help decorate on Christmas. It's all silently done for everybody else's benefit.
That's how good our altar guild is. You don't even know they're there.
I'm convinced they may not need me, but the church would not work without the altar guild. I truly.
And there is actually a secret room behind the altar. If you ever get curious, we can show you. It's where we hold all of our altar guild stuff. It's where where you'll find all of the different colored sheets, the different colored things, anything that you're like, where does that all go when it's not up here? It's in the back secret room. So if you're ever curious, we can show you one of those days. But yeah, thank you for that, because I forgot about altar guild. That's because they're so good. Okay, so let's jump on over. We're hitting a lot of points. We're trying to get it all in one lesson. So we were talking about the diocese. Let's jump over to the diocese and talk a little bit about them and kind of the general role in our relationship. And then we'll come back to our church and our leadership roles here within our church outside the service. So we are all fortunately and whether you know it or not, we are a part of one of the biggest dioceses in all of the United States. It is the Diocese of Texas, simply called. Nothing different about that, just the Diocese of Texas. Not to be confused with the Diocese of West Texas or the Diocese of Dallas, who we kind of hit on. If you took the state of Texas, our map, we have there's I guess I didn't look up, and I meant to what the term diocese means, to
Oh.
give a better understanding of when we're saying diocese, what are we talking about?
Do you want me to do that?
Yes, please, that would be great.
So consider that we're different from the Church of England in that our clergy are not appointed by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Our bishops are elected. Our clergy are hired by the church if it's a parish. And each diocese is autonomous. So we don't have an Archbishop of Canterbury. We have a presiding bishop, but it turns out the presiding bishop cannot tell any other bishop what to do in her or his diocese. So think of a diocese like a state, and think of the bishop as the governor. And the governor decides what happens in her or his state. So, for example, the Diocese of South Carolina said there will be no gay marriages in our diocese, and they're not, because that's what the bishop chose. And the bishop can make that rule for her or his clergy. That's come into question because General Convention said you can't do that. And the presiding bishop has gotten a little more authority through the triennial gathering. The biggest democratic gathering in the world is the triennial convention of the Episcopal Church. There are more delegates at that gathering than any democratic gathering in the world. 3 houses: the House of Laity, the House of Clergy, and the House of Bishops. So tricameral, right? Kind of like the House of Lords and the House of Commons. This is like part of our roots. The Bishop Diocesan is the Diocese of Texas. So Andy Doyle wears a ring on his finger with the seal. So that marks his authority to seal all things. He owns all the property that the diocese owns. It's his property. He's turned it over to the church corporation to have like a layer of separation, so he's not as liable financially. This is a clever move. But basically what Andy says goes. And that's the diocese. Now, the Diocese of West Texas could disagree with the Diocese of Texas. Each one does what they want in their own area, if that makes
And you
sense.
said the bishop is elected?
The bishop is
By whom?
elected and then consecrated bishop,
Who elects the bishop?
lay and clergy. And then there has to be another bishop there to consecrate them bishop. And the presiding bishop is usually one of those people, but there have to be at least 2 bishops.
Is that done within the diocese?
It is done within the
lay
diocese.
People and the clergy within,
Only within our
Texas
diocese,
diocese.
we pick our own people. The last bishop election was 3 years ago, when we elected Kay Ryan as suffragan bishop. So she can vote in the House of Bishops, but she is not the diocesan. That's Andy Doyle. So we have 2 suffragan bishops, Jeff Fisher and Kay Ryan. They go to House of Bishops, they get to vote. We pay for that privilege because we're a big enough diocese that we need 3. We actually have 2 other bishops, Hector Monterosso and Scott something, and they don't get to vote at the House of Bishops, but they've been consecrated bishops, which means they can come and ordain people. Remember, bishops can ordain, I can't confirm people. So Bishop Hector will be our bishop on December 4th, even though he's not our diocesan bishop. Hector can only do what Andy allows him to do. And the same with Jeff and Kay. They can disagree with Andy all they want, but Andy decides,
they gotta follow.
if that makes sense. Or leave. They got to follow or leave, and they work that out.
Who selects as lay people that who we vote for? I don't understand the structure of it. I mean, is it similar to politics where somebody decides they want to run and they
Yep.
campaign?
And then there's
for
a
it?
nominating committee, which does a little bit of a clearinghouse, but on the floor of council, that's what we call the annual meeting of the clergy and lay people in Texas who can change constitutions and canons. You can give a nomination on the floor for bishop. Odds are not good that that's going to be successful because the nominating committee has already vetted people. So they've received applications, they've prayed, they've discerned, they've looked at your background. Sometimes things slip through, like one of the suffragan bishops of Maryland turns out was an alcoholic and ran into somebody and killed them a few years ago. And people were scratching their head like, you didn't vet that bishop? You didn't know she was an alcoholic when you consecrated her? And the answer is they didn't know. She hid it. And it was a huge well, kind of scandal, right? Because she was driving drunk and killed somebody. So this is why we have a nominating committee who serves as a clearinghouse in general. The truth is, we as clergy are pretty influential over lay delegates because our lay people often say to us, well, who would you vote for? And I say, well, look, we're not doing it that way, but here's who I know personally. I don't know the other candidates. We try not to manipulate our delegates, but quite often the diocese is so big. Hopefully you know something about somebody.
The lay people who vote are only the ones who are at the convention.
Correct. So they've been
You're
delegated.
selected from the parish.
This
or
happens
from
at the
the
annual
diocese.
meeting every year. The parish designates, we get 4 delegates at council, whether there's a bishop election or anything more mundane, we get 4. I don't think anybody was one here last year. Every church gets, no, Julia wasn't a delegate. She could have been, but she had a conference. So anybody can be a delegate. And when you go as a delegate, in some ways you're representing your parish, but really you're representing your conscience. So people are elected in the Episcopal Church not to appease their constituencies, but to vote their conscience. Members of the vestry don't need to ask your opinion before we vote on something. They're there to vote their conscience. This is a Republican system, church governance, if that makes sense. Not a truly democratic system, right? They're not taking polls of the parish. Most people do, but at the end of the day, they have to vote their conscience. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's, you explained it really well. It's probably still as confusing as mud if you're not really, but the similarities are in a very similar way we run our government, in the sense that there's that kind of logistical follow through on all those things. And it may not seem like the diocese has a huge impact on us. You can go, why does that matter to me? But it is a very important part of our church and part of our leadership that we do, is we have the 4 representatives that we want to send to put our voice out there and vote our conscience. We have the bishop who comes visit. It's also so you know that when Bishop Hector comes, you go, who's Bishop Hector and why is Doyle not here? Now you know, because we have the 4 different bishops who are trying to, like Mike said, they're trying to hit every single church throughout the year. We have over 150 churches. It's logistically impossible for one guy to do it. So he's put together a team to help him do it. And that's why we'll get, and every once in a while you will see Andy come because we got on his calendar. Sweet. And then every once in a while you see Bishop Hector come because we're on his calendar. They're all wonderful people. They've all been selected and elected to do these things. And really, we are fortunate to be part of such a great diocese. There are a lot of dioceses out there in the country that are struggling, that are not as well run, that are both logistically and financially. We are fortunate to be in a place where we can go to our diocese and ask for help, and they can help us. We are fortunate that they are diligent in paying attention to us and trying to meet our needs when we have them. And a lot of good people are at the diocese. And so when you hear discussion about the diocese and the overarching government, this is kind of what we're talking about. We're talking about them, and really kind of who Mike reports to at the end of the day is the bishop and where he goes to. So any other questions about the diocese? That's a lot. There's a lot there.
I'd like you to add lots as an opportunity, and there's several sub-opportunities within lots.
We're headed that way when we get to service,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, we're heading that
Thank
way
you.
for sure. So diocese, yes.
I don't know if this is a good question for this, but Fort Worth was not part of us,
Mhm.
and now they are.
They are.
Why
Correct.
do people separate and come back? Probably a lot of reasons.
Well,
But
lots of
for
good
everybody.
reasons. I don't know necessarily why the Texas Fort Worth one. I know that Dallas and Fort Worth were together for a while, and they even actually disconnected, and then Diocese became Dallas and then Diocese Fort Worth. I'm not quite sure why that separation happened.
Don't let me take over.
Okay.
But I can tell you briefly that usually what happens is a diocese goes so big that people start to say, look, this is too big,
Yeah.
you know, and so there'll be a split. Usually when the diocese splits, the mother diocese keeps the goodiest goodies,
Yes.
just to be clear.
Yeah.
Like when San Diego broke off of LA kept all of Orange County. You can probably figure out why. San Diego got a couple places in San Diego, but the big income stayed with LA. When do they come back? When things are too small or it just makes sense? And so what happened in Fort Worth is that the Bishop of Fort Worth kind of supported an insurrection against the Mother Church and said, hey, if y'all are going to ordain gay people, no, and we're leaving and we're taking our property. And many of you may know it was very crushing that the properties were taken. It went all the way up. Did it go to the Supreme Court or the Circuit Court? And the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the breakaways keeping the building, which has never happened before. So now you took a diocese that was like already kind of racked by their bishop saying we're leaving the church, and then they got all the property too. And so they're just small, and paying a bishop when you don't even have a property is kind of exhausting financially, right? Because it's just layers and layers. So now you come together and you start to have shared resources. And sometimes parishes will merge. Like I'll tell you, I can't understand why there's a St. Christopher's and a St. Thomas, except they're the older one. St. Chris is the older one. And then we got built up when NASA grew this community, and we're very different. But you start to think like in the future, what if you merged and shared office staff and like you could do that. Now we're different enough and we're healthy enough that it's fine. But if it ever comes to that, it's interesting to think about what you could do if you put yourselves together. And we liaise with them increasingly because, hey, there's no reason we shouldn't share ministry just because we're two different places across the lake. I hope that was helpful.
So final note on the diocese, basically, if you looked at our map, I don't have a picture of our map. I forgot it, I'm sorry. But if you looked at our map, basically, Diocese of Texas has Austin, Houston, and kind of anything between. We don't have San Antonio, and we now have Fort Worth joining us. So like Mike said, a really big area, but really it's the prime cities too of Austin and Houston is what you want. And in there, we have also, just so you know, fun fact, we have a camp. The diocese owns a camp property called Camp Allen. Some of y'all have been there for different sort of events. That's diocesan owned and run. It offers opportunities for not only summer camp, but retreats during the year, spaces for meetings and such. That's usually where they do a lot of the clergy conferences, where clergy will go and meet with one another. It's a place that if you stick around long enough here at St. Thomas and in the Episcopal world, you'll find your way to Camp Allen at some point if you stay in the Houston, Austin area, in the Diocese of Texas. So those are some of that's the diocese. We could probably talk all day about all the logistics of that, but we'll move on to our bringing it back here home at St. Thomas, bringing it back locally. We talked about the leadership within the service. Now we're going to talk about the leadership outside the service and what kind of keeps the cogs greasy and running. And, I used to describe it to my youth. I would draw a little grandfather clock, and, I'd open it up and you have all the cogs in the system and all the different things, and each part is important, even if they're smaller or bigger, or this one is, our paid one, or, each role is important to keep the church going, to keep our community here with the lights on and people in the room. And each one needs to be there for us to be successful as a church. And so in that way, we'll talk firstly about a rector. Mike kind of hit on what a rector is. A church picks, and this is an important part, is that the church picks the priest. The bishop does not tell you as a church who you're going to get, which in some churches, in some worlds, that is how it's done. You say you get this guy or woman, and that's your priest. Here in our Episcopal world, the church decides. So when Father Mike was found, they put together a committee here at St. Thomas. They said, all right, committee, you're one. By the way, we love committees here at the St. Thomas and St. Episcopal world. So get ready, because I'm going to tell you all about them. We're going to go through all of them. There's a committee for everything. And if there's not, we'll make it. Don't worry. So they made a committee to find Father Mike. And they said, your goal is to find our next rector. And they take their time. They spend months doing it. They do work with the diocese and the bishop to find candidates. They're not just left out to dry to go, okay, Google some people and see if you can find someone. The bishop will bring some candidates to say, we have this person, we have this person. We fortunately found someone from San Diego, correct? Is that where you were
That's where I
previously,
was.
Father Mike? We found someone all the way from San Diego and said, hey, we really like you. You should come here, which is.
That at level 1, 2, 3, or 4.
So what was that?
We first went to level 1,
Oh, yes.
and then we went 2,
Two, yep,
3,
three.
and then 4, we were San Diego.
That's right. San Diego. That's right. That's right. And so, yeah, and we have a really cool way of doing that, a way of getting to that level 4. And you'll find a lot of the things we do is a process. You'll go, oh, that's a logistical process, but we do that to make sure that we are actively praying about the things we're doing and not just jumping into something without knowing that's going to work to fit our system, to fit the cog, that if we put a new cog in, or the cog fits our system, or that if we take one out, we can replace it with that. So that's an example of one of the cogs in the system. So another cog in the system, so we found a rector. Once you found the rector like Mike, the rector becomes the head honcho. They become the shepherd of the flock. And as the shepherd of the flock, they have a lot of power per se. They have a lot of authority on giving the church direction and giving the church focus on what we're going to do. Father Mike has done a really good job here at focusing us on service and community to others and loving all and accepting all. And so that's our focus. That's where we go. And we go as Mike goes. Now, Mike, the rector, is not just given full authority without someone there to hold him accountable. That's not a part of our system. It's also because we kind of reflect ourselves kind of off of our government. There's a respect of powers, a check of balances. We have something that's called vestry. Vestry is the leadership of the church, the parish member leadership of the church. They're your out of business, you would call them the
Board of Directors.
Board of Directors, thank you. I didn't get sleep last night. I don't know if I told you that. The board, they're your board of directors. They are the people who, along with Mike, enact the plans and the vision of what Mike wants to have happen. They also are able to look at Mike and say, Mike, I don't think that's a good idea. Mike, we can't do that. Mike, yes, but for the most part, as long as your rector is not a villain and is a good guy, taking the good guy or woman taking the right direction, vestry is there to support that vision, to support that idea and say, let's do it. Vestry is selected by vote at parish at the
Annual meeting.
annual meeting, yes. And so when we go to the annual meeting, you will see new vestry members come up. And you will see new vestry members leave. Vestry members also have a term of 3 years. So that way no one stays on too long or too short. So that way that there's some stability there, but not too much stability that it's there forever, getting some new fresh looks. So that's why at the annual parish meeting, you'll see a couple vestry members go off the vestry meeting, a vestry committee, and then you'll see some come on. Those meetings are held about once a month, and they play a vital role to the life of the church and making sure that not only is the vision that Mike has for us is being enacted, but also that the lights stay on and how we pay the bills and where do we get the money from and are we okay with that wise. And so if you want to be a part of vestry, just let someone know, and Mike and I know, and we'll let you be a part of that and let you know how to be a part of that. But then let's jump into, so there's lots of different cogs from there. And then also your staff. You have your staff. Of course, you have your rector, who is the head honcho. You usually have what's called a parish administrator. Ours is Sean. A parish administrator is basically like your go-to as a member of the church to when the rector is not in the office or not available. You can go to that parish administrator and say, I've got a question. And they really should have most of the answers for you and be able to say, yeah, I can answer that for you. And they kind of make sure that they are the administrator for the parish. They are the go-to. You can go to them and get your questions answered. They're also bookkeepers because just like any business or other church, we have to take care of our finances. We have to make sure that we are being diligent and careful with that and monitoring that and and doing all the things that you need to do to bookkeep. I'm not very good at bookkeeping. Ellen's much better at it. So we have Ellen here, who is our bookkeeper. She's wonderful. She's in the choir. You can meet her. And then upon discretion, and all these roles within the staff, each church, you're going to see different stuff. That's up to the rector to decide who and what he wants to hire. But those are two of the main ones you'll see as a parish administrator, and bookkeeper normally. From there, you'll see a flex of different kind of things. You might see a youth minister, you might see a children's minister, you might see someone in my role who is a minister to all families. From there, it's about different, and it's all about what you have prepared for your church and what you need your church to, what kind of side shepherd you need to come along and help you feed your sheep. And so here we have me, who's a minister to family. I'm what's called a lay minister. So again, kind of back to that lay, I'm not ordained. I didn't go to school like Father Mike. And so when you hear a lay minister, that's usually what that is that they're not ordained. But I'm here to focus on the family ministry and to grow that group. And each church is going to have something in that sort of style. You go to St. Chris right now, all they have is a parish administrator, the rector, and an associate priest. And that's one other role I'll talk about real quick. An associate priest sometimes may be there as well. An associate priest is just that. It's basically an assisting priest to the rector. They are the second in command. They work directly with the priest to make sure that his vision, his or her version, is being enacted as well. So over at St. Chris, they have an associate rector right now. And so that's their staff. So each church you go to, you're going to find different roles, different things, but logistically, that's about what you'll find in that kind of setup. That's staff. So let's move on to, I'm going to hand these out to you. You are actually going to see these today when you pick up your envelope for pledge cards after the service. But I've printed out just the sheet that talks about the ministries we have here at St. Thomas. So I will take one and pass it down. So we're going to go through these real quick. These, you can look at each one as a cog in the system necessary for our community to keep going and to be successful and to grow. And we are going to kind of hit each one, tell you about what they are. And then at the end of this, finding ways that you can get involved, finding ways that you can, oh, sweet, that's even better. I should have printed this.
I made that, so they can go together.
That's awesome. Okay.
There's
perfect.
a cheat sheet
Cheat
reference
sheet
to what
reference,
each group
print it
does
out.
and who's in charge of that.
So
group
take
here.
one, pass that down. It's basically got a little blurb for everything. So if you have a question about it, you can read it. So we have lots going on here at St. Thomas. I love seeing all our little dots, because sometimes you go to some churches and their little bullet points are like 5 or 6 bullet points, and you're like, oh, there's not a whole lot to do. But here at St. Thomas, we have a whole lot to do, and we have ways that you can be involved in leadership of the church. If all the things we talked about today in leadership doesn't entice you, or doesn't seem like, oh, that's not something I want to be a part of or help lead in, we've got lots. So let's just jump in. We've got acolytes. All ages are invited, like we said. Acolyting is what we talked about, serving in the service. Right now, we have a lot of children and youth doing that, but you are more than welcome to join in that as well. We have Advent alternate gifts. That is around Advent time. We do a lot during Advent, so there's a lot of ways you can serve during Advent alternate gifts. We also do a wreath making where you can come help with that. We have the altar guild that we talked about, which is kind of like the silent servants behind the service. They make sure that the altar's set up, they make sure all the colors are right, and they usually do their work on Saturdays or Fridays before the service. We have an annual audit committee. We are, if math is your thing, bookkeeping is your thing, and you love to like look at receipts all day and make sure that all numbers align, we always need that kind of help.
You're really selling it, Alex.
I know, sorry, I'm not big on it. I wouldn't be doing this myself personally, but they also work with Ellen, who I'm a big fan of. So if you ever get a chance to work with Ellen, you gotta work with Ellen. We've got the AV streaming ministry, which is a Bob right now. He's doing a really good work. Actually, our TV and our owl you see here has been done by your AV streaming ministry. That actually grew a lot during COVID with the videos that you see on YouTube of the church service and the cameras we have. They were really vital in keeping our services online during COVID and during the pandemic when we were the active part where we were all inside. Blast intergroup, I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of information about that.
Bacchanalian Ladies at St. Thomas. They meet for lunch or dinner once a month. It's purely social.
Social. That's good. There's also social things you can get into. Blessings in a bag, you'll see those out here. Brown paper bags, we make some food, we put them in there. We ask anyone who might need it or feels the need to take one to take one. We have the Bread Guild. That one I don't know.
We're
about.
trying to reinvigorate. They actually make bread that we use on Sunday mornings. We haven't done it during the pandemic because of like sanitation and distancing, but as we're coming out of that, it may be possible to go back to that. So literally
Yeah.
bread made by our people for our people.
Sweet. So if you're good at bacon and like bread, it's the Brotherhood of St. Andrew. I'm not sure about that one either.
It's a men's group that's dedicated towards study service, and they meet on Saturday mornings at 7:30 a.m. via Zoom. And they usually do education through the Great Courses series. They have a time of fellowship and prayer with each other, and sometimes they raise funds to help, usually men and boys with special projects.
Perfect. And then we've got Children's Chapel Helper. This one I know a lot about because I run Children's Chapel. So if you ever want to come and give me a hand, we have we were actually touching up to about 10 to 12 kids each Sunday, just depending on the Sunday and who's here, but always need another helping hand. Alexandria is currently helping with that when there's no one in the nursery. So it's we've got hands, but we could always use more. We've got choir, which of course you see, they're all dressed in blue on Sunday mornings. If you want to join choir, they meet on Thursday nights and Sunday in between services. So you can do that. Communities in our schools, we have a partnership in particular with, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the. Yeah, McWhorter, yes. Right down the street here. We do a lot of partnership with them and helping them out when they need help. I'm sure they also have lots of opportunities to help if needed. So if you want, let us know. We can get you to working with them.
I hate to call time, but I got to call time for
Yes.
your sake and for mine particularly. So please do refer to this because more going. And next week, we're going to come back together and talk about, are we doing scripture next week?
Yes, we're talking about
How
Covenants and
Episcopalians-
creeds.
the
Oh.
creeds. Yes, the creeds.
Even better.
Even better.
Okay, so we'll do that next week. And if you've got questions we didn't get to today, please bring them next week.
Yes, for sure. And thank you guys for being here. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Sorry for the abrupt